Good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to introduce Professor Philippe Bourgois tonight to present our distinguished lecture for the Australian Anthropological Society. Philippe is Professor of Anthropology and Family and Community Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. And Philippe's work is really well known to many of us and to our students. I think his work is wonderful for shaking students out of their assumptions about what anthropologists do. And his writing, I think, is that perfect blend of being accessible to students at all levels, but also really deeply challenging and theoretically engaged. Philippe has done fieldwork in a lot of different places and has a very long list of publications, but I think he's probably best known for his 1996 book, In Search of Respect, Selling Crack in El Barrio, and of course the wonderful photoethnography that he produced with Jeff Schonberg in 2009, Righteous Dope Fiend. And I have to say, that book is the ethnography that has moved me the most deeply of any that I've ever read and made me the most angry with the system, which I'm sure you're going to talk about more tonight. And Philippe's lecture tonight draws on his long-term work in cities in the United States, this time in Philadelphia, as he speaks about the moral economy of violence in the US inner city, ethnographic notes from Philadelphia's Puerto Rican ghetto. So please join me in welcoming Philippe Bourgois.
So can you hear me? Is that okay? So it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I apologize for looking like a bum. They lost my baggage on the airplane about 4 days ago, and they keep promising every morning to bring it, and they haven't. And I thank Andrew for all the logistics that he's done and shown me around and brought me here and tracked me down in Philadelphia, actually. So I've been studying the political economy of social inequality for the violence, drugs, and ethnic conflict in the U.S. inner city, more or less since the mid-1980s. My goal has always been to try to link, or more or less has always been, to try to link macrostructural coercive power to intimate experience and to local social cultural practices. I see the state management of racialized ethnic relations and social inequality through the dramatic phenomenon of inner city segregation in my country as one of the great contradictions and failures of the US model of economic and political development that, of course, since the 1980s, since 1980 specifically, took a particularly noxious turn towards hyper-incarceration with the zero tolerance war on drugs. And I'm thinking of this lecture and then the next one that I'll be giving on Thursday as complementary lectures. This first one is more about the local community level logics that trap people into relationships of violence, of intimate interpersonal violence. And in the lecture on Thursday, I'll be talking specifically about two different institutions that I see as the major ones. The most obvious is the carceral system, and then the other one is the medical diagnostic system of declaring people disabled that also foment what I'm calling a habitus of rage. And then, of course, the globalized narcotics economy, the way it manifests locally, being the other force that creates the actual rage that takes place. But today, I want to talk about the actually very conscious cultural logics that trap people into relationships of violence. So this is, of course, part of a 5-year participant observation fieldwork project in the Puerto Rican inner city of North Philadelphia, and that I did with a research team where we were analyzing the negative health effects of what demographers and quantitative sociologists refer to as hypersegregation and concentrated poverty. And just because sometimes when you're outside the country, it's hard to believe the levels of segregation in the United States. But this is the black-white line in Philadelphia it actually represents levels that are 80 to 99% segregation in these two halves of Philadelphia, with the exception of this region here, which is the Puerto Rican neighborhood, which is wedged between the classic U.S. Racialized divide. This just re-shows it with the green parts being African American and the green parts being white and the white parts being African American. The one thing also that's kind of interesting in this slide is that you see up here this bizarre exception that in the sea of white, there's all of a sudden, this means slightly less than 80% African American. That there's this little, and that's because that's where the carceral complex is located in Philadelphia, and classically it's surrounded by it's in a white community and disproportionately employs whites to guard the African American inmates. So it's a classic carceral system of managing the inner city. Now, just to give you that background, this also shows the proportions of incarceration rates among African Americans, Latinos, and whites in the U.S. So. And now just last one about this carceral background I'll be talking about the actual experience of it more tomorrow. But this is the sprawling carceral complex. And you can see up in the corner here the classic original 19th century Bentham panopticon. And what's amazing about this picture is that since basically this was actually turn of the century, since it was constructed, the city lost 600,000 people in a massive deindustrialization and white flight process. Now it's still over 1 million people. It's about 1 million. I think it's about I forget what it is, 1.5 million people. But it was a much bigger city. And instead of investing to do some kind of alternative with that population loss, they built this massive carceral complex. All of these things are different jails with slightly different security levels and logics and so forth. Now, just so you can see more clearly the Puerto Rican division location, that it's literally wedged between an African American and a white neighborhood, and I did want to put up also, just as a background slide, where you fit in the global carceral sort of picture of shame. You're not doing all that well. 134 per, but the United States makes you look like saints. Makes just about everyone except, I forget what it is, Kyrgyzstan and Russia. They're still much better than the U.S., so we have the highest absolute incarceration rate and the highest relative incarceration rate of any nation. So classically then, Latinos have a hard time fitting into the historical black-white divide, and that's one of the things that makes possible for this neighborhood to turn into an open-air drug market, because it's a place where both whites and African Americans can come to buy drugs, and especially whites now. Now, the Puerto Rican neighborhood overlaps with poverty. These are the census tracts that are over 80% Puerto Rican, and the poverty rate in our census tract is 56%. And the immediate census tracts surrounding us all have poverty rates of over 53%. 8 of the 9 poorest census tracts in the city are Puerto Rican, so it's definitely arguably the most vulnerable population group in Philadelphia. 2 members of the ethnographic team, George and Fernando. This is George, and that's Fernando Montero and George Carandinos, live on the block, one of the blocks that we're studying, which is and my partner Lori, who's also an anthropologist at Haverford, also participated in the field work, and we're all struggling to write the book up now, or start to write the book up now as a co-authored book. And now for the ethnography. I think I put this in one of the abstracts, I forget which one. During our first spring of fieldwork in 2008, within 2 months, there were 16 shootings with 3 fatalities, 3 stabbings, and 14 additional aggravated assaults within the 4 square blocks surrounding the apartment I rented in the heart of our fieldwork site. Right from the beginning, the social network we befriended made it clear to us that much of this personal and criminal violence was not a deviant act. It is embedded in what we're calling a moral economy, a set of moral economy logics. Violence becomes both a risk and a resource to be managed intimately through social relations because the state mechanisms of regulation are ineffective. Demonstrating the ability to mobilize violence becomes a public reputation that provides cultural and symbolic capital that then becomes useful social capital within networks of reciprocity based on kinship, friendship, romance, and utilitarian economics. Ironically, that same moral economy of violence then can't exist without a disposition to generosity and affable sociability that on most days in the neighborhood manifest themselves in peaceful and generous exchanges. And it is actually, one's experience of the neighborhood is that this is unbelievably friendly. It's not like us where we're always running from meeting to meeting and overwhelmed with things and hardly have time to say each other and stop. In the context of unemployment and the boredom of unemployment, people actually talk to each other a lot and actually pursue that as a mechanism to build up alliances and build up resources. And this is actually how much fun field work is on a hot day in Philadelphia. But the problem is that this extraordinary sociability becomes interrupted by these spectacular incidents of violence in a chronic way. And let me illustrate how the ability to mobilize violence becomes a valuable resource using an excerpt then from George's notes. So he's writing. A crashing sound and shouts makes me rush to the window in time to see a frail, middle-aged heroin addict slam into the side of my parked car. He's reeling from a punch to his jaw from Roland, one of my 22-year-old neighbors. Alfredo, a gangling 15-year-old who lives 2 doors down from me, jumps on the fallen man, kicking him in the side and the chest. Juan, a heroin injector who regularly buys on the block, is standing alert at Roland's side. Sol, Roland's mother, begins shouting loud enough for everyone on the block to hear. No one is going to disrespect me here. I live here. If anyone disrespects me, there will be consequences. If it's a woman, I'll resolve it myself. If it's a man, my son will. Everyone on the block knows that Sol's son, Roland, is a genuine, what they call, rider for his mother. He is someone who is ready to use violence to defend himself, his family, and his friends from insult and physical aggression. So George's note then goes on with him running downstairs to find out what happened and a few minutes later, sitting on the stoop with Roland, his mother Sol, and Juan, all chatting about what just happened. And Roland explains to George. Juan was the first to hit him. Juan shrugs at Roland and says modestly, I only went to talk to him at first, but to my eyes it looked like he was lifting his arm to hit you, so I punched him. Sol adds with pride, see, George, this morning a man thought I was staring at him, and he cursed me. When he came by again, I pointed him out to Juan. Then when the trouble started, everyone came out to help me. Roland, noticing George's interest, explains, yeah, now if Juan has problems, I'll ride for him and for Alfredo too. I'll do that because they defended my mom. Roland also explained that he was too angry at the moment to worry about his 10-year probationary status for narcotic sales and gun possession. He thinks also that having that personal well of rage to draw upon is crucial to being a man, and I'll talk more about the institutional forces promoting this sense of having an out-of-control rage and being proud of having that out-of-control rage. But Roland explained it that day that that's why he resents his mother's boyfriend, Carlos. He goes, when I get in a fight or I'm really angry, I don't think of anything, and I could kill you. Carlos doesn't have that anger inside him where he can fight. Even if he says, okay, let's fight, and comes down to fight someone, he would get his, oh yeah, I'm sorry, there'll be cursing and things, but I'll sanitize it sometimes. But I mean, obviously then, so he would get his ass kicked, not his, I was about to sanitize it as rear kick, but that sounds sort of silly. Because he doesn't have the anger to fight hard. And the other person will have that anger. I have that anger. Sol nods sadly. I can't depend on Carlos. Roland hugs his mother. I'm Sol's only son. Carlos doesn't fight. He won't get into my mom's problems. So I think God put me here for that reason. If I go to jail or if I die for my mom like this, then I don't care. I will die happy. I'll be smiling in my casket. Carlos, Roland's mother's boyfriend, conspicuously stayed inside during the entire incident, this fight that had just occurred. He is not a rider, and his inability to fight conjugates with a longer list of his other failures as a man that Sol, Roland's mother, does not hesitate to share with others when she's depressed. Carlos doesn't contribute financially to the household. He can't repair things in their crumbling apartment. He doesn't stop her from resisting the temptation to binge on crack, and he's been sexually impotent for the past 2 years. Now, conventional policy, press, and popular analyses often treat these elevated levels of violence in the inner city as some kind of a symptom of what they call social disorganization and individual pathology. The youth who are committing most of the violence are thought of as acting autonomously to be somehow lacking in adult supervision. But the violence that I've just described follows, according to its perpetrators, a social logic, as they explain to us, imbued by ethics and morality that we need to take seriously. It resonates also with gendered and age-graded and kin-based roles, as we saw in Carlos's case, and responsibilities, as well as material interests. Shared values with respect to the legitimacy of violence organize the stability of vulnerable social networks. The importance of what Roland refers to as being a rider represents the core dynamic of the moral economy of violence that traps young men and women into chronic cycles of violence. It creates reciprocal obligations for providing assistive violence to friends and family. It also promotes visible displays of aggression to maintain honor and reputation, the way Sol had done by staring at the man and then calling out her son to beat him up. I want to underline that the significance of the economic scarcity and hostile state institutions in elevating the value of of that assistive violence. Extreme poverty and insecurity turns personal violence into a valuable resource within a larger, morally regulated gift economy of exchange goods, services, effective bonds, and small sums of money at the margin of the legal labor market. And it's also and also at the margins of the drug economy that's subject to a hostile militarized form of law enforcement because of the illegality of drugs, obviously. Now, the term moral economy, as you all know, is most associated with the social historian E.P. Thompson and anthropologist, political scientist James Scott, analyzing, in James Scott's case, peasant resistance movements, and Thompson, obviously, the British, I forget which century, 18th century, British villages. These scholars have highlighted the way in which critical means of survival, in Thompson's case, the price of bread, in Scott's case, sharecropping arrangements, access to common land, and so forth, are subject to expectations about the appropriate obligations of the powerful, landlords, merchants, soldiers, and the police, towards the weak. Moral economies in the countryside form part of a patronage system that benefit the powerful, but are not immune to failure, leading to riot or revolution if conditions change and expectations are not met. Now, these two little boys are half-brothers, both of whose fathers have been killed. They're walking by the memorial of the shorter boy's biological father, who was killed in the beginning of our field work over an accusation of having snitched to the police about the identity, given information to the police, about the identity of a rival dealer who had shot at him. The taller boy's father was also murdered, but I'll end the talk describing that story. Now, the analysis of how moral economies mobilize collective retributive action overlaps, or we began with not with Thompson, but with Marcel Mauss's concept of the gift economy in non-state societies outside of or at the margins of the market economy. We all know that argument. A gift isn't free. It creates debt that requires future reciprocation. And successful exchanges over time establish hierarchies of respect and prestige and delineate social network boundaries. Dispositions towards and expectations of generosity are the precondition for robust gift economies. Thus, like the exchange of any type of resource, the exchange of violence creates mutual indebtedness and creates durable relations between exchange partners. And it's kind of ironic in some sense because Mauss's argument actually is that these forms of reciprocal change actually create peace in the absence of states and create hierarchies that are respected. Participating in violence becomes both a moral then and a practical imperative, a shared common sense. Failure to engage makes an individual vulnerable to gossip, defamation, as you saw in Carlos's case with his wife telling us all these personal things. Defamation, social isolation, and ultimately to violent victimization, as happened to this woman who didn't have networks to protect her. But now, we need to specify that we can't understand these cultural logics and values. I want to just reemphasize in the self-contained vacuum that Mauss was presenting things at. Anthropology realizes in retrospect that failing to see larger structures of power was the historical theoretical error of the traditional structural functionalist social anthropology that studied acephalous kin-based societies located on the margins of states in the mid-20th century. And in that sense, we can't understand these local cultural logics either and values as being in a self-contained vacuum. In fact, it's precisely because of the inner city because the inner city poor have such fragile economic capital in the context of a deliberately hostile, centralized state authority, that the practical and cultural value of violence in local intimate interactions becomes so important to youth. And it's also because this is also one of the very valuable things that are in the neighborhood. People know how to do violence, they know how to judge it, they know how to behave in it in very skilled ways. To maintain their self-respect, the young men and women growing up on our block invest a great deal of energy in violence. Roland Sol's son, the protagonist who threw the crowning punch in George's opening note, is unemployed. He lives as a financial parasite of his mother with his pregnant 15-year-old girlfriend and has developed a powder cocaine addiction. In contrast to these failures as a man and as the only son who fails to provide for his mother, fails to provide for his girlfriend, and is basically good, more or less good for nothing, he can actually step up, as we say in the U.S., step up to the plate. That sounds awfully silly in Australia. And he can reaffirm his love for his mother, which he fails to reaffirm in more traditional patriarchal ways or wannabe patriarchal ways of supplying her with money to pay her rent and so forth. But he can supply her with attacking his mother's insulter. And rather than regretting, then, the risk of long-term incarceration on a 10-year probation violation the consequences would be an automatic 10-year sentence for him for if he'd been arrested for that violence. He feels mystically empowered afterwards, referencing God and an epiphanal purpose in life to love his mother through solidary violence. And what's confusing about this, or what was confusing about this to us at first, was that, you know, on any given day when you look at Sol and Roland's relationship, you'll see them fighting over money, fighting over sharing, fighting over, you know, who used whose drugs and so forth. And when all of a sudden there's an extraordinary opportunity to reveal very self-sacrificing love, it's through these moments of assistive violence. So now, part of the moral economy of violence exchanges are straightforwardly instrumental, and that was certainly the case, for example, with Juan, the upwardly mobile heroin addict, so to speak, in the note, in George's fieldwork description, who threw the first punch. He was specifically trying to raise his fragile status as a heroin addict, and he was successful. Roland publicly announced and affirmed his new debt to ride for Juan. Juan's preemptive punch, consequently, ensures that he will not be subject to the same brutality or so easily subject to the same brutality that was inflicted on his victim. I mean, it wasn't a coincidence that they picked a 40-year-old frail heroin addict to be violent against. He's not going to have a robust set of moral economy riders protecting him. Alfredo, the 15-year-old, also took advantage of the opportunity to demonstrate his budding adult masculinity, or wannabe adult masculinity, with his kicks, proving himself for the very first time in his life to be noticeable as a worthy rider among adults. And by the way, these last 5 cemetery pictures were just literally in a single small section of the neighborhood cemetery, where we found a half dozen graves of men under 21 or under 22, and we were taking pictures of a mother's anniversary visit from our block to the grave of her son who was killed on the block. The economy of violence plays a very different structural role, however, in relation to the larger U.S. society. It buttresses the de facto apartheid boundaries of the U.S. inner city because most people in the United States are convinced that they'll be ripped limb from limb if they set foot in this neighborhood or in almost any inner city neighborhood. And television news pathologizes the poor as dangerous others and legitimizes punitive, zero-tolerance imprisonment for deviance of any kind. Violence's spectacular visibility then legitimizes contemporary US carceral policies and social welfare cutbacks. Now, in reality, as I was saying, street life in the neighborhood is peaceful on most days and almost hyper-sociable. And once again, it's precisely that sociability that makes the violence so easy to mobilize, trapping youth in reciprocal cycles of obligatory assistive violence. Neighbors, especially those who are marginally employed, as I was saying, and have time to kill, sit literally on stoops and organize barbecues, like in Australia, trying to make time pass. Children play in the street because there's nowhere else for them to go. After school programs, oh, I had the wrong slide there, okay. After school programs and summer camps obviously do not reach the children on our block because of the inferior provision of infrastructure and public services by the state in this neighborhood. There's a routinized boredom imposed by poverty, and it has that dual effect of sociability and dramatic conflict. The almost ritualized episodes of interpersonal conflict that I opened the talk with serve to break the frustrating, anxious monotony of poverty, unemployment, and exclusion. Now, I want to give a second ethnographic example then to flesh out more of the way this moral economy of violence is required as a practical need for extra legal enforcement mechanisms. The enormous drug economy can't rely, obviously, on state mechanisms to enforce contracts, define territory, and protect private property. And the extraordinary size of this drug economy and its imposition on the Latino population is, in turn, the result of, as I was saying, the collapse of the legal economy, and on the other hand, a racialized policing that makes Puerto Rican neighborhoods these interstitial spaces where white, black, and brown people can circulate without rapidly being arrested simply for their skin color. Because by an accident of colonialism, migration, genocide, and assimilation, Puerto Ricans are phenotypically a rainbow people, black, white, and brown, often within the same family. They're much more relaxed about race than most people in the United States. Whites who are scared to enter black neighborhoods to buy drugs move comfortably, or relatively comfortably, in Puerto Rican North Philly. Now, just a bit about deindustrialization. Philadelphia was renowned as a thriving industrial center through the 19th and early 20th century. It was the industrial heart of a thriving industrial economy. And this is this view from our rooftop. We can see, you can see here 14 abandoned factories that were operating in the 1950s when the Puerto Rican population migrated to work in those factories, which started disappearing immediately upon the arrival of Puerto Ricans. And in that sense, the drug industry filled that economic vacuum. So you see literally then drug sales in the shadows of the abandoned factories that used to employ the parents and grandparents of the people selling and buying drugs in the shadows of those factories. And the neighborhood itself has become then a platform for hundreds of thousands of dollars of narcotics every single day. And it's hard to imagine when one looks at the destruction of the neighborhood, how the population would survive without this massive daily influx of cash trickling through the neighborhood's small businesses and household-level artisanal markets and unlicensed food sales. The moral economy of violence then becomes effective for regulating this powerful drug economy And when you think about it, there's literally thousands and thousands of dollars of just cash dollar bills circulating on our very block. And there's absolutely no way to protect that through, through calling on state mechanisms that people would normally protect their business arrangements and their cash circulation with. So Benito is referred to as the bichote, i.e. the big shot, meaning the violent owner of our block. And the bichote is an extraordinary word if you stop and think about it, because it contains the colonial relationship with the United States, because it's from the word big shot. So it's a Hispanicization of big shot. But it's also a self-critical critique of male phallic obsession, because bicho is the word for phallus, and bichote is extra large phallus. So it conflates both the colonial relationship and the problem of oversexed men. So this bichote receives $5,000 a week from Rico, a local drug entrepreneur, for the privilege of selling heroin on this block. Sales began for most of the time we were there at 7:30 a.m. and stopped only when 1,210 packets it's about 0.05 of a gram, 3/100 of a gram in each packet of heroin are sold. Streams of primarily white addicts, customers arrive on foot, often dressed in rags and limping from abscesses. Benito guarantees Rico that no one else will be allowed to compete with him within 100 yards of his sales. Now, this arrangement broke down, however, in a midday shootout that left Benito's girlfriend wounded in the foot. Benito was lucky. The customized extension barrel of his assailant's semi-automatic pistol tangled itself in the pocket of his sagging pants as he was trying to draw it out. His opening salvo went wide, giving Benito enough time to pump 4 shots into his assailant's back and chest before speeding off in his chauffeured SUV. Over a dozen bullets sprayed into the brick facade and walls of 6 row homes surrounding the shootout. 3 bullets. Oh yeah, I didn't. Okay, so 6 weeks later, Benito was attacked again, but this time with assault rifles on Willow Street, his only remaining still active block. This time, his girlfriend, a different one from the one who had been wounded in that shootout, hence the bichote critique of big shots, was killed, and he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition with bullets in his torso. Benito retreated under the renewed police attention brought on by his midday shootings and left the block dormant for several months. More importantly, however, the shootout proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of the neighbors' tolerance of the drug economy. Its carelessness in the middle of the day violated the delicate moral economy that for the past 16 months had granted Benito an undisputed fear-based respect and begrudging tolerance by local residents for being such a large employer of the block's young men. Over the next few weeks, criticisms of Benito's greed multiplied. We heard complaints that Benito never did nothing for us this summer. When the block captain organized a city-sponsored cleanup of the block's back alleys, they noted that Benito and Rico both failed to pay any of the drug-selling crew to help pick up garbage. People also remembered that at the July 4th party, Benito failed to buy meat for the barbecue or fireworks. Several mothers started grumbling. He didn't even buy the kids one of those plastic air-blown swimming pools to stay cool on the hot days. And over the next year, in the vacuum left by Benito's exit, several attempts were made by 3 different bichotes to reopen the block, but they all failed, following multiple police raids that were brought on by what's called the snitching of the mothers. who started openly complaining, we're trying to raise kids here. And it's interesting because supposedly when you snitch, you get killed. That's the sort of mythology of the whole thing. But this was considered, in some sense, completely legitimate by both the sellers and by the wannabe bichotes themselves. So the snitching was rumored to be coordinated by Luisa. She was the mother of a 20-year-old who had been accidentally killed 5 years earlier by a stray bullet while he frantically tried to collect children playing on the sidewalk during a shootout between rival drug dealers. Now, and just in terms of what I was saying, people are occasionally physically hurt when they report to the police. And on our block, one of the apartments was firebombed after the owner reported drug dealing activities to the police. However, in this case, even former sellers living on the block celebrated the newfound calm that Luisa's alleged snitching had brought. We even heard two young men who had previously sold drugs for Benito comment. Now the mothers can let the kids out to play without having to worry. So there is a tremendous ambivalence that constantly needs to be legitimated about both the commission of violence, the selling of drugs, and that needs to be balanced, that people are torn about. What's interesting about it is that most often people can't live up to these moral economy relationships, but they're constantly a subject of conversation, and that's what shows their importance, is that people are making evaluations about these obligations and about the control of violence and the use of it. Now, 8 months later, however, to our total surprise, Benito returned and smoothly reestablished drug sales. Unlike the other two would-be drug bosses who were unable to maintain operations without being sabotaged by the mothers, Benito had a unique relationship to the most charismatic and legitimately to the mother who was snitching most loudly and taking responsibility for the snitching, Luisa. Benito had paid $8,700 for her son's funeral when he was accidentally shot, and he even commissioned a reggaeton song in her son's honor. According to Benito, right after her son's murder, unbeknownst to him, Luisa had been sending people around with a box to raise money for her son's funeral. And Benito tells us, "Someone came over to me with that box, and I said, no. We don't do that on this block. I told Luisa, you aren't going to be asking for money with boxes for your son's funeral. That's a loss that lasts forever. How does it look? I'm out here making all this money, and Luisa is sending out a box to collect money for her son's funeral? So I told her, get whatever casket and do the service the way you want it, and I'm going to pay for the whole thing." We asked Benito, who is very affable and relaxed in his interactions with block residents, how he managed to reopen the block when, in his absence, two other bichotes had collapsed under police pressure brought on by snitching. He answered without hesitation, "It's respect, and then the love of the neighbors. You get that by looking out for them. If anyone else tries to open the block, the neighbors will call a cop quick. But they respect me, and they know they can talk about me. And I talk to them, so it's not a problem with me. If they need help with rent or bills, they know they can come and talk to me. So when I come around and I speak to them, they be like, that's fine. And when shit's done right, you look out for the neighbors. Like if they're doing a little barbecue and want to close the block, we just buy a whole bunch of stuff for the kids and do it right." And that summer, Luisa began organizing the annual last day of summer block party. And this requires collecting signatures of 75% of the block residents and paying $125 to close the block to the city to close the block to traffic. When Luisa asked George for his signature, he offered $5. Blushing, she returned George's money, explaining, "Normally we all have to pay, but this time Benito is going to pay for everything." Now, I don't have time then to address another dimension or another expression of a moral economy of violence that's operating parallel to this, which is the routine practice of police brutality. But I thought I would just show you this, this Fox News helicopter primetime clip to give you a taste. What was interesting about it was the reason why well, I'll tell you after you see it. Let's see if it, wait, oh, it's not working. Oh, okay, I should have checked that right before starting. Okay, well, it's basically a picture of the police dragging 3 young men out of a car and putting them on the ground and stomping on them and beating them up. What the accusation was that they had shot someone and then, with the arrival of the police, had fled. And it turns out that none of them were accused of the shooting, and the police who were actually initially fired by the commissioner were reinstated and paid back pay when the union appealed their use of force. Now, so what I think I'll do right now is jump to then the just a very brief snippet of children's experience of this violence surrounding them. And this is actually towards the end of our field work, the same little boy that you saw in that picture walking by with his stepbrother at his stepfather's funeral, rest in peace memorial. And this is how his mother, Camila, describes it. Papito started having problems in school because they used to make fun of him a lot, saying, well, you don't have a dad. I have a dad, and he comes and picks me up. Pepito was like 5 then, so I spoke to his stepfather, the man memorialized in the Rest in Peace photo, who incidentally was a bichote and was killed by the younger brother, precisely in a moral economy of violence activity. He was killed by the younger brother of one of his arrested workers. Initially, people said it was for snitching, but then the other word on the street was for having failed to bail out his worker and following his arrest, because it's the bichote's responsibility to bail out and pay for the lawyers of their workers, which they regularly fail to do. And the only way to have leverage when that happens is either to snitch on, to snitch on the bichote. So there's a moral economy of snitching taking place within the ranks of drug sellers that makes drug dons actually sometimes pay attention and defend their workers, or to engage in direct violence against the person. So anyhow, this is back to Papito's mother talking, explaining. She's telling us how she explained to the stepfather. She told him, you're going to start picking him up, doing things with him that a dad does. Take him wherever you go, show him things. And he did. He started going with Papito to school, picking him up, dropping him off. And after that, Papito felt better. He was like, all right, Ma, I got a dad now too. So when Biggie got killed, this is the mother talking again, that's when Papito started peeing on his bed. He dropped weight since that happened. He cries a lot. And George asks in this interview, where was Papito when Biggie got killed? And she explains, he was right there in front of him. As soon as the guys started shooting, Papito, his little brother, and their older sister, they saw everything. Then Papito was like, they killed my dad, and now they killed my second dad. So I'm going to stop there. I actually brought the wrong talk and got mixed up. I'm sorry about that. The wrong version of it. So I was a little disjointed at times. But I'm happy to take comments and also flesh out the pros and cons of conceiving it as a moral economy of violence. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure there'll be questions. Thank you so much for that. That's great. Okay, can't see Nick.
A very practical question. How did you deal with the ethics committee?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I'm in Australia. I don't know, but the trouble is, it's being videoed. I should probably make you turn off the video. Basically, lied to them. No. It's hard to deal with them. Because they're set up for a biomedical model of injecting people with radium and radioactive substances, and so they just don't get the nature participant observation relations. And I mean, I guess one of the good ethical controls in fieldwork like this is that one gets killed if one is too unethical, and so you do have to look out for the people that are willing to participate in the fieldwork. Everyone on the block, of course, knows that I'm a professor and an anthropologist and writing a book, and some people want to talk about it, and most people, 90%, want to be in the book and are angry that I've told them that I won't use their real names. And then those who don't want to be in the book just are not in it.
Thank you very much. I'm just thinking about those images you had of all of these memorials of these women who've been given that very poignant set of graves of young men. And I'm just thinking about what's happening with the sort of construction of masculinity that seems to be part of the underpinning of this. Like, you told us about the word tragically losing Strada, but what does it feel about their own sense of, their mortality and the fact that every day they're walking past these memorials and so on?
Could you repeat the question? Hard to hear back there.
Yeah, so it's a question about the memorials and how the young men participating in it experience sort of the visibility of their potential mortality walking around. Did you want to follow up? No. The amazing thing is that you even have rap songs making fun of it, right? So you have rap songs saying the most that you'll ever be is a Rest in Peace T-shirt, because that's the other memorial that one does, is make these T-shirts of your close friend who is killed, and so people are acutely, visibly aware of it, and there's memorials all around. And I don't have a good analysis of it, but what it feels like is somehow the memorials legitimize and normalize it as well. And almost like, because you get these extraordinary, when you go to to a funeral, you get an extraordinary solidarity and mourning by everyone, and it's super moving. And then the next day, everything is back to normal in terms of those processes. So it's almost like it re-legitimizes. Now, the other thing, just to bring it up also, is that the moral economy of violence isn't specific to men, in the sense that women also participate. And Roland's mother called on her son to do it. And what's interesting about it is that it's extraordinarily gendered. So men are not allowed to publicly fight women. So they can't, on the street, in public, beat up a woman. And you get this thing of men calling on women, on their women friend riders, to beat up a woman who's insulted them or who's cheated on them or something like that. And I put in that one slide of two women fighting to also break that monopoly that sometimes gets assumed on that masculinity of violence. The other thing that's very bizarre is that it's done in a totally gendered way. So when the women fight, they usually don't use guns. Whereas when the men fight, it very rapidly, or often is with guns.
There's a question here and then one at the back there. Yeah. You were first. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a fascinating talk, and my question refers to this talk and to your book, In Search of Respect, wonderful book, and your last question about gendering of violence. So I wondered, often violence seems to be represented as this reaction against the factions, against the state, and also that women fight as well as men, but I wondered about the relationship to that and domestic violence, which is happening indoors. And I'd say that I'm around a housing estate where there's a lot of violence, but men are regularly jailed for domestic violence, so it's not public fighting, but plenty of domestic fighting. But I wondered, it seems much more difficult to glamorize violence as a resistance when it's domestic violence.
Yeah, one of the examples that we have in a longer version of this that we've written up as an article that's not out yet, that's going to come out in Current Anthropology, is assistive violence around domestic violence. So domestic violence is one of the places where assistive violence is regularly mobilized, so the kin members of a woman who's being beaten up by someone are more or less obliged to engage in violence with the man who's beating up their female kin. When it's visible, when it's not, so it actually does interface with another one of those dysfunctional relationships to the state, where the arrest rules on domestic violence are very inconsistently applied at the street level by the police. Should we? Yeah, we can. Why don't we go with ask a few, and then I'll try to answer them together. Maybe just to get an idea. Sorry.
Small question, and perhaps a slightly larger one. Back to the memorials. I was struck by the showed that they had a blank space next to them, and I'm wondering who they imagine is going to be laid next to them in that. Is there any sort of imaginary around that? The other question is, and it struck me when reading through In Search of Respect, when reading it, one of the interesting elements I thought were the people who weren't involved in the drug economy. And I suppose I should be talking about this again again, my mind goes back to that to think, how would this ethnography look from that perspective? And I just wonder if there's any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting question, but let me, I'll try to, if I answer that, it'll be I'll go too long on it, so I'll answer it.
That one then, and then I think
Okay.
that might be it.
If you could elaborate a little bit on the cosmology of the block. It relates to the memorials. I was specifically asking myself about the place of religion in the moral economy.
And one last one from us, and then that's it, I think. Yeah.
Just one question, what's off limits? I mean, I remember seeing The Wire, and then there was, on Sundays you can't shoot the grandma. And if someone does that completely disrupts the moral economy. So what are the rituals or the places where you see these things going off kilter?
So, in some sense, the neighborhood compared to what I was seeing in the mid-1980s and early 1990s in New York is quite different in that that the situation has gotten so much worse in super segregated, isolated neighborhoods than it was even back then. And so in Philadelphia, what we see actually is that you have to sort of be a freak and a weirdo, not in this neighborhood, not to be involved in the drug economy. So you can do that, but you have to literally become, a Jehovah's Witness in a super devout way in order to do it. And people do that. So people do convert to the evangelical religion in order to get out of but they'll often go back and forth and then slip back into drugs. So what we're finding is that people will also go into the legal labor market and subsidize their lousy legal job with the low pay by a little bit of selling on the side at their legal job, just because the legal wages have gone, the real value of legal wages have gone down, and the concentration of the markets has gotten even more dramatically profitable in neighborhoods like this. So it feels like there's fewer people that are on the margins, much fewer than in New York City. And then related to that was a bad idea for me to jump the other questions. Oh yeah. It is actually. One of my students teaches in an inner city school, and they were doing a memorial to the kids who'd been shot in the high school, and they had a debate on. It was such a beautiful memorial that they had done, a debate on the practicality of leaving a blank space for the kids that were going to be killed in the coming years. But the whole structure of these levels of violence, both the super visible interpersonal violence, but even the absolute structural violence of the schools, they have since they have an over 40% dropout rate, they don't need to have space for the number of kids that enter in their freshman year of high school. And there isn't even physical space, numbers of desks and classrooms available for the large number of freshmen, in the senior and junior years, the fourth and third years of high school. So that level of sort of planned violence and anticipated violence gets normalized in those kind of budgetary infrastructural ways. I'm sorry?
We can finish if you like.
Okay. No, yeah, from the jet lag probably. Oh yeah, religion, yeah.
What are the parameters of religion?
Right. So, everyone militantly believes in God, and is usually Catholic or evangelical in Christian evangelical. There's also significant Muslim presence through being incarcerated. And that's also one of the ways, both the evangelical religion and the Muslim religion are two of the most effective ways for quitting addiction. They have a much, much higher success rate than the biomedical addiction programs. Because it's an interesting contrast in that when you go into a biomedical program, it's really a bummer. You have to be addicted for the rest of your life because it's a brain disease that you never can forget because you can relapse and you have a high statistical likelihood of relapsing. And and in the biomedical model, that was very useful for pathologizing addiction, is to turn it into a brain disease, and so that that was sort of a progressive move by doctors to legitimize heroin and drug addiction and turn it into something that people should believe should be a medical problem as opposed to a legal problem. But in the contrast with the evangelical thing, you're completely cured instantly. And not only are you cured, you're actually chosen to be a privileged person to cure other people as a cured, evangelical or Muslim convert. And so and that's very, very appealing to people, and actually works for a lot of people, and doesn't. But as we know, with addiction treatment, tragically, nothing works and everything works. So people do recover, but people also usually fail many times before ever recovering, and sometimes die before recovering. So the religious presence is very visible, and that was, everyone gets baptized and so forth.
Thank you so much for answering so many questions. Can you join me in thanking